Hello, this is Jared from LearnToDraw.com. In today's tutorial on Android app development, we'll be using the Jetpack navigation architecture component along with the BottomNavigationView widget to navigate between different fragments in your app. I'm currently showing a blog post on LearnToDraw.com that explains how to do this. I'll link it in the description and it has all the detailed steps involved. I'll show you what we'll be building in today's tutorial. We'll have 3 fragments added to an Android app, and we'll use the Jetpack navigation architecture component along with the BottomNavigationView to navigate between those 3 fragments. Those 3 fragments contain icons in the BottomNavigationView and a text description describing each fragment. So let's get started. I'll open Android Studio and I'll create a new Android Studio project. I'll use an empty activity, and I'll give the application the name of Bottom Navigation Jetpack Tutorial. So the first step involves retrieving the navigation architecture component dependencies using Drawable. So I'll use those dependencies that I've included in my blog post for the navigation architecture component, and I'll pull that into the app level build.gradle file to retrieve those dependencies. I'll switch to project view, go into app, build.gradle. Into the dependency section, I'll add the new dependencies for the Jetpack navigation component and hit sync. In step number 2, we'll create the string resources and drawable resources that we'll use for the icons and the labels in the bottom navigation view. So we'll open the resources in app, source, main, resource, and we'll go into the value section and we'll add some new strings. Okay, and I'll just give them the names fragment 1, 2, and 3. Fragment 1, 2, and 3. We'll use those in the text in the bottom navigation view. Next, we'll add 3 drawable resources to use as icons. So right click on the resources directory and select new vector asset. Now look for an image that has the number 1 in it to use for fragment 1. And I'll repeat this process for the other 2. Okay, now you can see in the drawables, we've got those 3 drawable resources we just created. So next we'll create the menu resource for the bottom navigation view. So we'll right click on the resources directory, go new, Android resource file. In the resource type, we'll select menu. For the file name, we'll call it nav menu. So we'll add 3 items to the menu resource. Each item will have an ID, which will correspond to a particular fragment. They'll also have an icon and a title as well. So let's add the items now. So for the first item, we'll have a title of fragment 1 that we defined earlier. Then we'll have an icon for fragment number 1, which we created before. And we'll have an ID created, which will correspond to fragment number 1. Okay, and we'll copy this twice more. We'll replace these 2 items with fragment 2 and fragment 3. Next, we'll add a bottom navigation view to the activity layout resource file. To add the bottom navigation view, what we'll do is we'll just copy this layout resource file that's included in the blog post and open the activity main layout resource and copy it over. Okay, so as you can see, we've got a text view And below the text view, we have a bottom navigation view. That bottom navigation view will have an attribute called menu, which will correspond to the nav menu that we previously created. So next we'll need to create fragments. We'll be adding to the navigation graph. So we'll create 3 basic fragments for fragment 1, 2, and 3. So we'll start with fragment number 1. We'll extend fragment. And we'll override 2 methods, onCreate and onCreateView. We'll create a fragment layout resource file. Fragment 1. And this will contain just a text view. And I'll center this text view. In the fragment layout resource, we'll set the text to use fragment 1. So we'll set up this fragment to use this fragment layout resource. In the onCreateView method, we'll use the layout inflator. Then we'll return this view. Now we'll duplicate this class 2 more times for fragment 2 and fragment 3. Then we'll duplicate the fragment layout resource file twice as well. We'll update the fragment layout resource files to say fragment 2 and fragment 3 accordingly. Then we'll make the changes in fragment 2 and fragment 3 classes to use those fragment layout resource files. Okay, so now we're in a position to create a navigation graph. So we'll do that next. Jump into the resource directory and go new, Android resource file, navigation, and we'll give it a name, navgraph. Now we'll add 3 destinations to this navgraph, fragment 1. We'll add fragment 2 and fragment 3. Now we'll change these IDs to use the ID we included in the menu resource. So for fragment 1, this should be, instead of fragment 12, which should say fragment 1. And instead of fragment 22, it should say fragment 2. And instead of fragment 32, it should say fragment 3. Okay, so now we've got to add a NavHostFragment to the activity layout. So we'll add the NavHostFragment to the activity layout resource file. I'll copy this code over from the blog post. Now I've got a NavHostFragment that's been added to the main activity layout resource file. So we'll jump into the nav graph and check that NavHostFragment has been picked up in the main activity. Finally, we'll set up the NavController with the bottom navigation view in the activity class. To do this, we'll need to add a few lines of code in the activity class. So I'll copy these over from my blog post and I'll jump into the main activity. Okay, so the first line involves finding the NavController. So the NavController can be used to navigate to different fragments in your Android app using the navigation architecture component. It can also be used to set up the bottom navigation view. Next, we will load the bottom navigation view widget into a variable. Next, we'll invoke the setup with NavController method to connect the bottom navigation view widget to the NavController. So now let's test this out in the emulator. So fragment 1 is the start destination in the nav graph, so it will be loaded first. And you can see that fragment 1 is highlighted in the bottom navigation view. So if we select fragment 2 in the bottom navigation view, it will take us to fragment 2. If we select fragment number 1, it will take us back to fragment number 1. And if we go to fragment number 3, it will take us there as well. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching my tutorial on how to use the bottom navigation view with the Jetpack navigation architecture component. If you enjoyed this, please like, share and subscribe. Thanks for watching.